Hey everybody, welcome to episode 91 of the Askdap show, where we answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. On this episode, I talk about, is a dealer required to tell you about anything wrong when you're purchasing a used car?
Horachi via YouTube says, so I'm wondering what's that on the hood? What is it used for?
Okay, so this question was asked on our recent video that we have shot about a MK4 GTI, saying how not to buy a GTI or some issues around things you should look for when buying a GTI. The video is blowing up right now, so I'll make sure you link to that here where you can check out the video. But what this is referring to is on the front of the hood, there's something there and they're asking what that is. That is a hood bra. Oftentimes you would maybe have a bra that would cover the whole front of the car. That one's just on the hood and is intended for a couple different reasons. You could use it for aesthetics. Some people like them for that reason, and they've kind of become popular more for aesthetics. Originally, those were kind of put there for protection. My personal thoughts are this: oftentimes, especially the ones like that that are actually kind of go onto the paint itself, oftentimes over time, people who leave them on there long term, they'll actually start to chafe and actually do some damage to the paint that's actually underneath them. So in those circumstances, I would say it's not generally something that you would use to protect the paint. Oftentimes, on some car like that, it had a badgeless grille. You might use that to get rid of, so you don't have to fill the hood notch filler and it still looks good. You could use it for trips, something that maybe you take a long trip, you put it on your car to make sure you don't get rock chips along the front of your hood during a long road trip. Not bad for that either. If you're looking for something like that, I say maybe go down the road of clear bras. They're kind of expensive, but they have more long-term longevity as far as won't have as much effect on the paint. Although even then, oftentimes, you'll get a little bit of a variance when you pull off a clear bra, assuming it's good enough to actually protect everything, that the paint underneath it is either different based on the fact that it hasn't had all those UV rays hitting it, or it's been protected for a long time. So the paint behind it is a little bit messed up, whereas that paint's still perfect. So, those things, I think they may or may not do a perfect job as far as maintaining the paint of the vehicle. But if you were to go down the road of doing it, I would always recommend clear bras over an actual bra like that. Again, if you're doing it for aesthetics, it's a whole different story. And maybe you're doing it to cover up a rock-chipped hood.
Neil Porter via YouTube says, if I'm buying a used car from a dealer, should I still get it independently inspected? Are dealers obligated to fix or inform you of any potential serious issues?
Okay, Neil, awesome question. I love this question. There's a lot of layers to it, so let's take a look at some of the variations. So first, let me talk about this. Should you get a vehicle inspected regardless of where you're buying from? My recommendation would always be yes, because depending on who you're buying it from, they may or may not have either had it properly overlooked or fixed the things that need to be fixed on it in the first place. I can tell you, as coming from the dealership world, oftentimes, keep in mind, used car managers, their job is to sell the car, pay the least for it, sell it for the most they can. That's basically essentially their job. So oftentimes what will happen is they're gonna do basically the bare minimum of what they have to do to make a car saleable. And that means sometimes cutting things that would be recommended by a service department when they did an inspection on the car. That wouldn't generally be things that wouldn't pass inspection, like bald tires or brakes that are completely smoked or things like that. But it would mean other things that maybe some maintenance things that could be done, but they're not going to. The one variation to this is going to be certified cars. I don't know every manufacturer certified program, but I know Volkswagen's fairly well. And so they have a lot of requirements when you're buying a certified car. Now, do some dealers have I heard of things being dishonest where a dealer might cut corners and not have a certified car serviced properly? Yes, but they shouldn't do that. It's dishonest, and they would be obligated to take care of those things, obviously, regardless of whether you found that out before or after purchasing the car, because of the list that Volkswagen requires them to actually complete before actually selling a car as a certified car. So for example, one thing on a certified cars, I think they have to have 2 keys. I don't know if it's 3 or 2. It probably depends on the car, but I think a minimum of 2 keys for all certified pre-owned VW cars. So whereas on just an average VW car that you would buy used, you wouldn't have that guarantee. On a certified car, you would have it, which would kind of give you that obviously sense that you're getting more value, which is part of the reason why I think actually CPO cars are actually pretty good buys for the average person if you're looking at a used car, because the amount they cost more is actually pretty insignificant relative to the value that you get overall with the additional warranty and, again, those requirements that you have along the path of doing that. So aside from certified cars, going to regular used cars, yes, I would absolutely do that. Keep in mind, I've seen cars get sold, 3 to 5 months later, the car needs brakes and tires because the customer hasn't inspected it. That's something that is not a requirement for the dealer to do. Whereas if you were to negotiate that into the deal, it gives you a lot more leverage to get it done before you're actually buying the car. After you buy a car, it's your car. Whether you chose to make an informed decision and know that the brakes were approaching the end of their life, or the tires were approaching the end of their life, or the timing belt was due, let's say, in 10,000 miles, which that happens too. I mean, keep in mind, any car you buy with a timing belt, if it's got 80,000 miles, you're 20,000 away from a $1,000 maintenance repair, assuming you're having somebody else do it, $800 to $1,000, which is pretty significant cost. So definitely, without a doubt, always do that, because unless you're an expert and you know exactly all those little intricacies, you're not going to know, hey, this car has a timing belt, it's going to be due at XYZ, it's something that's going to be due in the next 15,000 miles. You should be aware of that when you're buying this car. So I would suggest yes, especially if you're not buying it from a dealer, because let's say you're buying it from a Chevy dealership and they happen to have a VW that got traded in, they're reselling that car. Their technicians are the ones who looked at that car. They're not experts. They don't deal with those cars every day. They're not going to know things to look for, problems to look out for, things that they know need to be addressed before selling a car. So for that reason, I would always recommend, yes, have a car checked out by somebody else. Again, that car is a perfect example of why $120 could save you a ton of money by avoiding buying a car that potentially is problematic.
John via email says, I noticed this oil leak in my 2013 GTI. I was wondering if you could point me in some direction as to where the leak could be coming from so I can buy the correct parts to fix it. Thanks.
All right, MK6 GTI, this is an oil leak. For a frame of reference of anybody, this is actually shooting underneath the turbo, and you see kind of the oil leaking kind of around the turbo. It's kind of all there. I think I've covered some variation of this before, but I thought because this obviously shows a direct picture of what's going on, that I might be able to shed some light on this. So anytime there's an oil leak in a car, you always have to start by cleaning it off completely. Unless you can identify exactly where the leak is coming from without any further effort, then you should clean everything off and then continue to run the engine and then check it to determine exactly where the leak is coming from. Anything else is just, if you have experience, an educated guess. If you don't have experience, it's just a guess. I can tell you that based on the location of this is obviously leaking on top of the turbo coming down below it. It's probably, just guessing, the valve cover and cam cradle assembly on TSI engines that would be all one piece. They use a special anaerobic sealant that we showed actually installing in our Mark V engine build video. We actually showed the cam cradle bolting on. We're using that flange sealant. We offer actually a different version now that's more cost effective. That would be the option for you, made by Permatex. That's an anaerobic sealant. That's about half the cost of what the Worth green stuff we were using before, but still meets the same requirements of being an anaerobic sealant like you would need for that. So that's most likely what's going on there. I can tell you that is something that has no gasket there. So if you're going to be going through that, you actually have to pull off the valve cover, which is the cam cradle, clean all that up, and then reseal it with that, again, that anaerobic sealant, which I'll link to in the description where you can check that out.
JMB 2027 via YouTube says, I understand the Haldex 5 doesn't require a filter change, lifetime filter concept similar to the lifetime differential oil, but if I want to change it, what's the part number?
All right, so this question is asking about Haldex filters. If you're not familiar with Haldex all-wheel drive, I shot a video that talks about Haldex specifically and kind of how it works. I will link to that video here where you can check that out. It talks about all the different variations of Haldex over the years. Yes, you're correct. Gen 5 Haldex does not have a serviceable filter. It just has the fluid that you replace, obviously drain and fill the fluid at the service interval recommended by VW. There is no serviceable filter at all. I looked through the parts catalog, and I also looked through some of the technical documentation around Gen 5 Haldex on the Mark 7 Golf R stuff. It does not even list where a filter would be in any of the technical documents. It just talks about all the different components. All of the serviceable components of the Haldex system on that Gen 5 Mark 7 Golf R are basically the Haldex pump, the Haldex module, a little bit of electrical circuitry inside there, and then basically the whole rear setup. So there is really not a lot of serviceable parts in the Haldex system, and generally, from my experience, when any Haldex failures actually occur, they're either usually the pump or the module related, and not other parts in the system. So unfortunately, for someone who's hyper vigilant, like someone looking to replace a filter, even if it requires tearing down the entire Haldex system, there is no serviceable filter that I'm aware of. And again, I've never torn apart one of these things, so I don't know. I don't know if there is something actually in there that somehow could be found and serviced. But all the VW technical documentation and parts that they have based on the parts catalog does not point to any serviceable parts in that would be a filter. So unfortunately, I can't help you with a part number or getting the part for you. Thank you for watching episode 91 of the Askdap Show, where we answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. If you have any questions or comments about the questions answered in this show, be sure to leave in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.